Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our second installment of Bath Climate Conversations. And I'm Hannah. I'm the Program and Outreach Manager from the Patten Free Library, and I'm here to just welcome you to the library and to the program, both in person and on Zoom. If you're joining us on Zoom, please note that this is a Zoom webinar, so you won't be able to turn on your camera or your sound, but you can use the Q&A feature to put in any questions that you might have for the panelists, and then we will share them at the appropriate time. You can also enable closed captioning if you want on your Zoom by clicking on the CC at the bottom of the screen. And just thank you everyone for joining us. It's going to be a great and very informative evening.
Hi there, I'm Paul Perkins. I'm co-chair of the Climate Committee. And first of all, let's thank you all for coming out tonight. Those of you who do come. And it's a big challenge we have on our hands dealing with climate change, and getting together and talking about it is an important activity. I'm a member of the Climate Commission in Bath. We formed about 2 years ago. I'm a co-chair. And we have been engaged in a number of initiatives. Probably the most significant, I suppose, is that we were able to work with the city council to get a resolution passed to commit ourselves to lowering our greenhouse gas emissions in town, in keeping with what the main climate council was calling for. And also, we committed the town to, or the town committed itself to, preparing for inevitable impacts such as sea level rise. We've engaged in a number of other initiatives. I won't go into them now, but we're a pretty active commission. We meet once a month, and we would love to have anybody come and share your thoughts, your questions, and good ideas you may have to help us along. I guess we could go to the next slide. So those are the commission members. I don't know if you may know some of them. And we, as I said, we meet once a month. We have some subcommittees, one working on energy issues, and the other mostly just on strategic planning, what directions we want to go. We are in the process of developing a more robust and detailed climate action plan. We're having a vulnerability vulnerability assessment done of Bath's waterfront and properties. And then from that, we hope to develop a more detailed climate action plan, which really offers a guide for how we can cope with the impacts that are expected, and also with our greenhouse gas emissions. We have, why don't you go to the next slide? Yeah, and just to highlight what's expected is anywhere between 2 to 4 to maybe even 8 feet of sea level rise by 2100, which would make downtown Bath an island, which is pretty, I don't know what it is, overwhelming, disturbing. So we're trying to figure out what we're going to do about that. What we're going to do about all the people that live along here and all the structures, and how do we prepare? And the other point I wanted to make was that when we did a greenhouse gas inventory a few years ago, 95% of the emissions from our community come from community members, businesses, industry, and only 5% from city emissions, the city operations. So in other words, it's going to take all of us to figure this out. Our city leaders can only do so much. They can provide guidance, but we need to step up and figure out how we're going to lower our emissions. Next slide.
You can
Oh,
this one, you can control it.
I think I only got one more. Oh, wrong way. Yeah, so tonight we're having the second in a series of climate conversations. This one on the natural landscape. Sorry, this one on the built. Yeah, this one on the natural landscape. We had one on the built environment back in October. And there's one to come in March, and we hope to have an ongoing series about climate change and what we're going to do. So tonight's agenda, I won't go into this, I'll let Ruth do this. And again, I just want to highlight, we really need, we would really love to have your participation. So feel free to come to our meetings, they're all open, and thank you for being here.
All right, so I'm just gonna quickly, my name is Ruth Indrick. I'm a project director at the Kennebec Land Trust, and I'm just gonna quickly run through the agenda. So thank you, Paul, for doing the welcome. Our next piece, will be welcoming Justin Schlawin from the Maine Natural Areas Program, part of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry at the state. He's an ecologist who brings a wealth of knowledge, and we're hoping that Justin can kind of give us an overview of all the interactions between climate change and our natural landscapes in Mid-Coast Maine. So he'll talk about characteristics of the landscape that help it remain vibrant in the face of change, what types of landscapes can help to counteract climate change and capture carbon, and just how the landscape might change as climate change happens. So we're really excited about Justin's introduction, and then after that, we'll switch to a set of 4 local leaders who will share some things that are happening right here in Bath to plan for supporting our natural landscapes and sustaining them as climate change happens. And then after that, there'll be a time for questions and conversations, and we hope that you all have a chance to share your thoughts. After the program, there is a sign-up sheet outside if you're interested in signing up and being on a mailing list for future programs like this. There is also a handout sheet. Paul, can you hold one? Do you have that on you?
Yeah.
There's a 1-page handout sheet that you can fill out if you have ideas for future programs. If there's something, and then also we have resources about efficiency as well. So you can check out our resources or share your thoughts for future programs. So with that, I'll pass it on to Justin, and Justin is going to be joining us over Zoom this evening.
Hey everybody, Ruth, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Sound
Great. I'm so glad that I don't have to talk about the built environment. You gave me a scare there for a moment. Oh, I think you need to enable screen sharing again. Let me know.
Okay, you should be good.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So I'm gonna talk today about the biodiversity of the lower Kennebec region and planning for climate change in these natural habitats. My name, as Ruth said, is Justin Schlawin. I'm an ecologist with the Maine Natural Areas Program in the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. So let's see. Okay, great. So I actually live with my family up in Bodenham, just a stone's throw over Merrymeeting Bay to where everybody is down there. So this is a region that I know pretty well, both through my work and just through living here and recreating. Here we are all down at Small Point Beach down in Phippsburg. So in this talk today, I'm going to introduce the Maine Natural Areas Program, discuss at a high level the concepts of biodiversity conservation and climate resilience and how they interrelate. And then I'll give a sort of a brief overview of terrestrial habitats in Maine's lower Kennebec region. I'm pleased to see you're going to have a separate talk on the shoreline and some of the aquatic and marine elements. Hopefully, that's not really under my purview, so I have given them pretty short shrift here in the presentation, but they are really important. So with this overview of these habitats, I'll discuss with each habitat group sort of some of the climate change and other stressors to biodiversity in those habitats, and then look at some conservation actions to help build resilience or help conserve those habitats. So the Maine Natural Areas Program, we work together with the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife to serve Maine citizens as the most comprehensive source of information on the state's natural resource, important natural features. We work on endangered and threatened plants and with rare and exemplary natural communities and ecosystems. The Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife addresses rare animals, rare and threatened and endangered animals. Natural communities are assemblages of plants and animals that co-occur across the landscape. It's a scale of habitat that is a most practicable scale for conservation actions. And so many of the habitats I'm going to be describing, where I'm describing those habitats at the scale of the natural community. The Maine Natural Areas Program works in partnership with the Beginning with Habitat program to provide maps, data, and technical assistance to a wide variety of stakeholders. And additionally, the Maine Natural Areas Program conducts long-term monitoring in several areas, including ecological reserves and at sentinel sites in salt marshes up and down the coast to track the changes of sea level rise. So when I give a presentation introducing concepts of biodiversity conservation, I always like to start with a slide showing the pizza pie of species that we have in our state. So in Maine, we have estimated 35,000 or more species. And as you can see, they're not evenly distributed among taxonomic groups. The greatest group is invertebrates, followed by fungi, algae, plants, etc. I have not even included microscopic things on this chart that we know very little about. So of these groups, we know a lot about some of them. We know a lot about the vertebrate animals, which constitute about 2% of the species list that we have. We know quite a bit about our plants. We know a little bit about invertebrates, fungi, and algae. But in all, we probably know very little to nothing about 75% of the species that occur in our state. So what this means for biodiversity conservation actions is that, yes, it's absolutely important to be working at the scale of these species that we know are threatened and of concern. But in order to capture the full pie of species that occur in our state and maintain our state's biodiversity, we need to use course level tools. And that's one important reason why conservation of habitats is so important. Now, I know this is a cryptic chart, so don't spend too much time studying the details here. But what I wanted to illustrate here is really the drivers of biodiversity of any of the given places across the Northeast. So in 2010, Mark Anderson and Charles Faree published a groundbreaking paper that demonstrated that the biodiversity of any given place could be accurately predicted with just 4 physical variables of the environment. Those included a suite of physical and geological classes that are present, the latitude, the elevation range, and then the area of calcareous bedrock, which supports a suite of species that depend on limestone or circumneutral habitats. So when we're thinking about this in terms of biodiversity conservation, we don't necessarily know in the future what the habitats of any specific physical environment is going to be, but we know that the physical environment is still going to be there. So when we're conserving habitats, it's critically important that we're doing conservation at the scale that we're including examples of all the range of physical aspects of the landscape. And we'll cover this again in, over the course of the next few slides. So I've taken this definition of resilience from the IPCC. And resilience is the capacity of interconnected social, economic, and ecological systems to cope with a hazardous event, trend, or disturbance, responding or reorganizing in ways that maintain their essential function, identity, and structure. The Nature Conservancy, led by Mark Anderson, has done quite a bit of excellent work to help develop conservation tools around climate resiliency science. And so, as I previously described, that initial paper describing the biodiversity, the predictors of biodiversity, those physical elements of the landscape, otherwise known are enduring features, we really need to be including intact ecological systems on all of those wide variety of landforms on our landscape in order to maintain our biodiversity. And that's one of the first key concepts of climate resiliency science. Next is identifying places with high adaptive capacity. These are areas that have a lot of structural diversity and in landform or in scale of wetlands, for example. These are areas that might have a lot of niches for different species to retain the species that are already there and provide a wide variety of climatic opportunities for those species. And lastly, and I think most importantly, we need to be maintaining connections between these different sites. They need to be intact, have intact ecological structure within these sites, and then connections to other similar habitats are really important to ensure that species flow can occur across the landscape. Now here, this is what I think is probably the slide with the most important takeaway message from this presentation. And this kind of boils all these concepts down into a pretty simple way. And so I'm going to run through it for you. We choose a habitat of any type. In this image, we're including mostly photos of salt marshes. Habitats, regardless of the type, occur on a spectrum of ecological integrity, from a poor ecological integrity that's perhaps highly fragmented by development, all the way to examples of really intact examples of that habitat type with little to no evidence of post-colonial disturbance. This spectrum of, if we look across this spectrum of ecological integrity, you'll also find that the contribution to biodiversity is completely correlated across that spectrum of ecological integrity, with those fragmented habitats contributing to the least because they don't have the scale or the ecological condition to support the full range of species of that habitat. While the high intact examples do have those conditions. Similarly, the resilience and adaptive capacity of any habitat also is correlated along that spectrum. For example, research has shown that salt marshes that were highly ditched in the 1800s or earlier for salt hay production are still less resilient to adapting to current sea level rise. Whereas marshes that have little or no historic ditching seem to be more resilient to adapting to sea level rise. And that's true regardless of the habitat, not just salt marshes. And then similarly, carbon storage is maximal over the long term in these systems with high ecological integrity. Which means this is great news, because conservation actions to address any one of these issues will benefit all the others. All right, So I'm going to move into describing the geology, sort of the physical settings of Saginaw County in the lower Kennebec region, and how that affects what habitats we have. This is going to be a pretty high level overview. I don't want to dwell too much on it, but it is informative. So the bedrock in this region, the predominant bedrock types consist of acidic sedimentary, mafic, and moderately calcareous bedrock. But these bedrock types only have an influence on the habitats and vegetation in areas where the superficial deposits that were deposited following the retreat of the Laurentide ice sheet 12,000 years ago, these bedrock types are really only significant in predicting vegetation in areas where those superficial materials are very thin. And so that occurs in some areas, for example, in South Bath, areas sort of like near the, the community forest lands that are here. It occurs in Phippsburg, along some of the ridges. But for the most part, this region is covered in superficial materials, and the dominant superficial material is glacial-marine silt and clay, and this is very fine sediment deposits, and this is the most prevalent superficial material. These areas, by and large, were because the soils are more suitable for farming, were largely converted to agriculture, and then many of them subsequently abandoned, or sort of toward the end of the Civil War. So a lot of our second growth forests are on this type of habitat type. That includes pine forests, hemlock, and oak forest as well. Till sediments are not super common in Bath area south. They're a bit more common in Bowdoin and areas north of Bowdenham. These areas have a little bit more topographic micro diversity, and often will have more vernal pools associated with them. Also, they'll have less history of soil disturbance and will be a little bit more ecologically intact in terms of the soil structure. Though, virtually all areas of this region have had a history of harvest and logging. Coarse sediments are pretty localized to beach and dune systems, or to the stream alluvium areas, such as in Bowdenham. A lot of the prime farmland in Saginaw County is on these historic stream alluvium sediments that were deposited during a period of higher sea level following the retreat of the Laurentide ice sheet. The elevation here, as you all know, is quite low. The high point is 630 feet in Bowdoin, Saginaw County. So we'll revisit sort of the habitats, and as we look at the habitats specifically, we'll see how they correspond to some of these landform classes. Before I go into that, I just want to note that the Kennebec estuary region is part of a beginning with habitat focus area of statewide significance. Focus areas are areas of it's basically biodiversity hotspots around the state that are collections of rare, threatened, endangered plants, animals, and significant habitats. We've recently gone through a process to update many of these focus areas. There's pretty minimal change that's going to be coming down the pipe with the Kennebec estuary focus area. But these are really great conservation tools used by the state and by a variety of programs to drive conservation work into ecologically and biologically diverse areas. Okay, finally to the habitats. I'm going to begin with a suite of upland forest habitats that are common in this region. These are what we consider the matrix forest. They're really the dominant habitat type across our region if you excerpt out the water. And these are sort of critically important for providing habitat for a wide variety of common species, including interior forest birds, fungi, species that depend on large home ranges such as deer, moose, bear. We don't have many moose and bear in this region, but we do have them. Some of these forest types, the red oak and oak pine forest, are sort of the more common hardwood forest types and occur in areas with dry soils and slopes or ridges. White pine, mixed conifer forest is, while it's a forest type that occurs pretty widespread around the state, in this region, it often occupies sort of a second growth forest type on old farm field situations. Additionally, hemlock forest is pretty common in this area. Hemlock forest is probably the most mature forest type in this region, in part because for a long time there's been little to no market for the wood of hemlock. I should note there aren't many rare species associated with these matrix forests. And part of the reason for that is that the state of Maine is as you probably heard, is 89% forested. And because we have such extensive forest cover, the common species are common to those habitats and therefore not tracked. That's not to say there aren't some rare species that are in our matrix forest situations, but typically rare species are not associated with these common forest types because the habitats themselves are still so widespread in the state. Some uncommon or rare forest types include, and I put spruce fir forest in the uncommon forest type category. In the lower Kennebec area, it's pretty much restricted to near the coast where the climate is tempered by the ocean. In spruce pine woodland also occurs in some similar settings and occurs along those areas of ridges with thin soils, as I previously described. Pitch pine woodlands also occurs on ridges with thin soils. This is the photo here actually is at the Basin Preserve in Phippsburg. And I think we were given this by the Nature Conservancy, possibly by Nancy, who's here. In some of our pitch pine woodlands in this region, there's a rare plant called the smooth sandwort. Pitch pine habitats are globally rare habitats across the board. And this habitat, as far as we know or we understand, it is a fire adapted habitat, but the fire return interval is pretty long, about 100 to 120 years, which is a really kind of a difficult fire return interval to manage for. Forest structure in this region, a lot of it is a relic of land use practices of the past, including historic farmland use, but also subsequent harvesting of woodlots. This stand age chart is based on some modeled data that we have at the Natural Areas Program, and is corroborated by the U.S. Forest Service's Forest Inventory and Analysis Program, and basically shows that the median forest age and most common age of forests in this region is about 60 to 80 years old. Very little of the region is over 100 years old. Less than 1% statewide of forest is over 150 years old, but it's that number is probably much less for Saginaw County. Certainly there's some trees that are that old, but at the stand level, there's really, I don't think there's anything that is 150 years old. The stands that are over 100 years old are mostly hemlock forest stands. Well, what does this mean for carbon? A recent report from University of Mass Amherst and University of Vermont, which is really a really great resource called Forest Carbon, an Essential Natural Solution for Climate Change, describes sequestration as being greatest in stands that are 30 to 70 years old. So forest stands in Saginaw County are sort of in a peak state of sequestration, which is essentially should be thought of as the rate of carbon capture of these forests. But it's important to note that that carbon storage continues over time as stands age continuously. even as they get much older. So the forests in Saginaw County it's in a great place of accumulating carbon, but there's a lot more opportunity for carbon storage in Saginaw County forests. And in a few slides, I'll talk about some management strategies that address carbon. So some of the climate change impacts on forests, we're already seeing increased temperatures and precipitation, particularly in spring and fall. The precipitation events that we're seeing are not at the times we historically would have seen them. And you all are probably equally familiar that we have been having to water our gardens quite a bit in the summertime, and that's a little bit different than it used to be. We're already seeing an acceleration of invasive species establishment and growth, particularly among forest tree pests, which are really expanded and problematic. And that's something I'll cover in the next slide. We're expected to see a decline in spruce fir forests, though it's unclear whether that is going to happen in coastal settings or not. There's a new project out of the University of Maine that's asking that very question and looking at what are some management solutions to help manage for spruce fir in coastal settings in the future. So research on that topic is still ongoing. We're expected to see increases in oak-dominated forests, which are already quite a common part of this region. So with regard to the oak forests, we might not see a dramatic change. So some of the invasive tree pests that come to mind for me that I'm quite worried about are the ones that are currently very problematic in Saginaw County, including hemlock woolly adelgid and brown-tailed moth. Hemlock woolly adelgid is now pretty much widespread throughout Saginaw County and is sort of at a phase in infestation where it's affecting trees but isn't leading to widespread mortality. And that may change in the next 10 years. The Maine Forest Service, which takes the lead on all the invasive tree pest work, is releasing beetles to combat hemlock woolly adelgid, but the success of that is still unknown. And one of the challenges in managing for hemlock vis-a-vis hemlock woolly adelgid is the continued lack of markets for hemlock wood. So it's not easier for land managers that are conducting timber harvests to essentially liquidate that resource or replace it with more suitable species. Not that necessarily that's a recommended practice anyway, but it is a challenge moving forward from the management point of view. Brown-tailed moth is just a major nuisance and public health hazard, as you all, I'm sure, have experienced across our county. It can lead to some tree mortalities. It still sort of depends on understanding what the sort of long-term outcome is for brown-tailed moth. A single year of defoliation isn't going to kill many trees, but repeated years could have some major impacts. Two species that are on the two pests that are on the doorstep of Saginaw County are emerald ash borer and beech leaf wilt disease. Emerald ash borer is pretty devastating to our ash species in Maine, and beech leaf wilt was recently discovered in further east in the mid-coast and has just exploded in terms of its impact and its range, and will likely be in Saginaw County and impacting our county in the next 10 years. Okay, so moving on from the doom and gloom to the what can we do about it? So these actions here are from the Maine Forest Carbon Task Force, and I recommend, if you're interested, diving into that the report from the Maine Forest Carbon Task Force. They lay out these strategies in a little bit more detail and provide some helpful information. One, sort of the most important, I would say, strategy that we can employ is avoiding forest conversion to other habitats. If we return back to my slide describing that spectrum of ecological integrity, we lose sort of all the benefits of forest by converting it to other to development or other land uses. It's the establishing reserves in areas of high ecological value or carbon storage is another important strategy. There's a lot of fee conservation land in the Kennebec estuary already, and so that's a tool that's being employed already by KELT and other land trusts and other organizations, including the state. Some active management strategies include treatment of invasive plant species, targeted management for resilient tree species such as oaks and pines that are well suited to the site, and then intermediate forest treatments. And this is useful for land managers that are looking to improve a tree crop for sale. And it goes in hand with increasing rotation length, so delaying harvests for a number of years. Okay, moving on from forests to estuarine wetlands. The estuarine wetlands of the lower Kennebec region are really the primary reason why the Kennebec focus area was established in this area. They include just some really important habitats. The 20% of the state's Spartina salt marshes occur in the Kennebec estuary, and nearly all of our freshwater tidal marsh occurs in the Kennebec estuary. Associated with Spartina salt marsh, there's 5 rare plant species and several rare animal species, including the salt marsh sharp-tailed sparrow, which nests in high marsh situations, and then the salt marsh tiger beetle. Of the 15 rare plant species in freshwater tidal marshes, 4 of those species are considered globally rare. And then the freshwater tidal marshes, the creeks also support the tidewater mucket, a globally rare freshwater mussel, and one of Maine's most rare fishes, the redfin pickerel. So tidal marshes are really important for a variety of values, in addition to their contribution to biodiversity, including recreational values, as a nursery and food source for commercial and recreational fisheries, for floodwater storage, erosion, wave energy protection, and water filtration. But they're also really important carbon sinks. It's often called blue carbon or coastal carbon. And these systems accumulate carbon relatively slowly, but store tremendous amounts of carbon. And for that reason, they're considered in some publications as irrecoverable carbon, because the time frame to restore the carbon lost from these systems is just so great that it's not really in the time span that we can be doing actions to combat climate change. So, as you all have already been discussing, sea level rise is considered a potential stressor to these systems. We're seeing an acceleration in the rate of sea level rise over time, with where over the last 20 or so years, we've been seeing a rate of about a foot per century of sea level rise, up from about 2/3 of a foot in the previous about 70 years. So that's pretty concerning. And that increase in the rate of sea level rise is potentially very impactful for our tidal marshes. So the tidal marshes occur in equilibrium with sea level in under normal conditions, where rates of accretion, which is essentially sediment deposition in these systems, is balanced out with the erosion that occurs in sea level rise. But with a rapid rate of sea level rise, there's concern that this equilibrium will become out of balance, and the salt marshes will not be able to keep up with the rate of sea level rise. So some of these photos here show some of these expanding salt pans that are a result of some marsh die-off. Similarly, we're also anticipating that salt marshes will be migrating inland. And so the conservation actions, the things that we can do really revolve around ensuring there's adequate buffers for these marsh migration areas. So this is an image from southern Maine. Unfortunately, I didn't take one from some of our salt marsh systems in the Kennebec estuary, but it illustrates the point that some of these natural areas are anticipated to accommodate a new salt marsh. And so even if we lose all of our existing marsh areas, which would be really catastrophic if we did, we should continue to have some salt marshes in these areas where the marshes have migrated to. So our conservation actions, as I noted, are largely around ensuring adequate buffers to our salt marsh systems that include marsh migration space, but also upland buffers that prevent inflows of nutrient inputs, which degrade salt marsh systems as well. Restoration is a really important conservation tool for tidal systems. I know KELT has already been working on a number of projects to remove tidal restrictions and is involved at on the Back River Creek, expanding the tidal access there. So that's really important. The Maine Coastal Program has released a tidal restriction atlas that helps identify priorities for improving connectivity of these tidal systems. Now, restoration, such as the work that KELT's doing at the Back River Creek, is really important, not only to restore the ecological function of these habitats, but also from a resilience and carbon perspective. Tidal marshes with impacted hydrology are out of balance and are actually emitting quite a bit of methane. And this is definitely true in the Back River Creek situation. Methane is an extremely potent greenhouse gas, much more potent than carbon. But with hydrological restoration and improved tidal connectivity to these sites, those impacts are reversed and the greenhouse gas emissions are reduced, and those sites can continue to act as carbon sinks. Okay, moving on to our beach and dune systems. I'm not going to dwell on these too much. Pictured here is a pitch pine dune woodland at Patten Beach. These are, again, globally rare habitats associated with relic dune systems that have been stable for quite a long period of time. Closer to the beach, we have dune grasslands, and then our beach strand, which of course provides critical habitat to threatened species such as the piping plover and least terns. So these are really dynamic systems. The Patten Beach in particular is our state's most dynamic tidal, or I should say beach dune system. And beach dune systems statewide are generally very dynamic, and sand is in a constant state of flux being exchanged from the ocean back to beaches and then back to the ocean again. I'm going to just open I'm going to change screens here to open let me know if you can't see this, but this is a time lapse that demonstrates just how dynamic Patten Beach is. You may be pretty familiar with how it's changed over time and potentially impacted the bathhouse that's pretty close to the ocean. I'm a bit concerned that over time we are going to lose our pitch pine dune woodlands, which are essentially surrounding the bathhouse and going west, just because of this constant cycling of sand deposition. These are systems that are they are these relic dune systems, and they may be completely lost as sea level rises. We just don't know enough about these systems to understand what the impact is going to be as these sand budgets continue to shift. What we can do, and this area is already conserved in a state park, is just ensuring that these natural areas have enough movement to breathe, and that these dynamic processes can just continue without us building additional impervious infrastructure that might affect them. I'm going to return to my presentation. Okay, I'm almost done here. So just touching on freshwater wetlands, non-tidal. These are a relatively small portion of this region, but they are ecologically important. We have a rare habitat called the pitch pine bog that occurs in some coastal areas. It's other freshwater habitats that are important include vernal pools, which provide important habitat for rare species such as spotted turtle and ribbon snake. And then we have a number of small peatlands in this region. And peatlands, as I described salt marshes earlier, and this is yet another sort of difficult to read chart, but I'm just going to highlight that peatlands are systems in Maine that store among the most carbon of any habitat. And a huge amount of that is considered irrecoverable if that habitat is degraded or lost. So to just ensure the resilience and sort of those carbon storage functions of those habitats, it's really important to retain them and leave them undisturbed. All right, lastly, and I'm going to give these aquatic habitats a pretty short shrift, as I said, but these provide a habitat for a number of critical rare species. There's a number of rare animal species associated with aquatic habitats. There's rare habitats, particularly in Merrymeeting Bay, associated with tidal systems. But hopefully that'll get covered. These aquatic systems will be covered a little bit more in your next session. A really useful tool that's available to address connectivity issues in coastal settings is the Mainstream Habitat Viewer, in which you can look at surveyed barriers and potential barriers in a region and help prioritize how to restore connectivity. This is really, as I've noted, restoring connectivity in these aquatic systems is a really great way to restore the ecological function of these areas and make them more resilient as climate changes. I'm going to just touch on a couple other resources that will be useful for you to explore. The Maine Beginning with Habitat program is a great partner. They've worked with us and they help serve our data to the public and have a number of great resources to explore biodiversity data in Maine. The Nature Conservancy has done quite a bit of work assessing the terrestrial resilience across North America. And there's a resilient land mapping tool that is really useful for those who don't have their own mapping platform to explore. Maine's Wildlife Action Plan is a great resource for understanding conservation actions that relate to rare animal species in the state. And there's a number of actions related to climate change as well. I'd be remiss to not mention the Maine Won't Wait plan and the treasure trove of documents that's available through the Maine Won't Wait plan. So if you haven't had a chance to look through these already, there's just some really great resources. And the Natural and Working Lands group of the Climate Council has provided a lot of great resources for conservation actions, including advocating for additional land protection work for sensitive habitats. Maine Forest Service, as I noted, is the go-to agency to address forest pests in the state of Maine. And the governor's task force on the creation of a forest carbon program final report is a really great resource to look at some forest management strategies that relate to forest carbon. And lastly, the Maine Natural Areas Program has 2 publications that are available. The Natural Landscapes of Maine, which describes in detail many of the habitats that I was describing here to you all. And then our Maine Invasive Plant Field Guide, which details the various invasive plants we have in the state and what their potential impact is. and how to treat them, etc. So the take-home messages that I hope you walk away with are that the Lower Kennebec region contributes tremendously to the biodiversity of the state of Maine, that conservation actions, which are supporting ecological function of habitats, are also benefiting the habitat resilience, as well as carbon sequestration and storage, and that connectivity is key for species habitat resilience and adaptability in the face of climate change. And with that, I don't know, do you all want me to take questions now, or should we wait until other panelists have engaged? I'm going to stop sharing.
I think, Justin, for now, if you don't mind waiting until our other panelists share, we'll wait until until the other presenter. Does that work?
That sounds great.
Okay, thank you. And could you share the next slideshow? All right, so thank you so much, Justin, for giving that amazing overview of our region. I think what we're transitioning to now is having some folks who do work locally in Bath talk about what does this mean on the scale of Bath, and what are things. So I asked Ellen to come and to answer 3 questions. And so the first is, what impacts of climate change are they most worried about in Bath's natural landscapes? And then the second thing they're going to all touch on is, what are some of the actions that they're already starting to take to address some of these issues that Justin highlighted? And then the last piece is, what could happen in the future? What are potential future options for things that we aren't doing yet, but we could think about doing in Bath and in our neighboring towns to start to help sustain our rich natural landscapes as climate changes. So first we'll have Jack Hernandez and Nancy Spera from Jack's the city arborist, so part of the Bath Forestry Division, and then Nancy's the chair of the Bath Community Forestry Committee. And so we'll start with you two. If you could share things about group, and I'll
sure. Great. Thank you very much for having me. And
I'm just gonna sit here.
yeah, keep it concise, Nancy, and I agree that I'll do, excuse me, most of the presenting on this. So my name is Jack Hernandez, as was said. I'm city arborist. I'm a licensed forester and a licensed Maine arborist. Long time, all my life Bath resident. Grew up in the city, and I'm glad to be working here. So the climate change impacts that I deal with in the forestry division on a daily basis really are, it's an eye towards the changes in our forest composition. So what I mean by that is what is starting to change in our forests. Introduction of non-native invasive species that are a major issue, as Justin eloquently put in his presentation. Certainly, unfortunately, alive and well here in Bath, and we're doing what we can to work to address those issues. And also, we have threats from pests and pathogens. So, emerald ash borer, as Justin talked about, hemlock woolly adelgid, and a number of issues that, as we're starting to, not to get ahead of myself for the future, but we don't know what we don't know in a lot of things. So the current actions that we're taking to address this is focusing with an eye on climate resiliency. So when I think about that, I use a recent example. I was looking at a public works project that's going to impact some trees going through a neighborhood for stormwater separation. So when I'm out there looking, I see that we have a bunch of Norway maple, which, as many of us know, are non-native invasive trees here in the state of Maine and in the city of Bath. They are widely planted and are prolific reproducers, unfortunately. And so there were a couple of Norway maples that were on there, and I said, hey, this is a really great opportunity that we might be able to take these things out. As the course of this project, the roots are going to be impacted by it anyway, and then we're going to select a grade treated plant, and it's once it's gone. There was an ash tree that's also going to be impacted by that. Unfortunately, I'm realistic. I realize that I'm going to be dealing with emerald ash borer here quite soon, and you know, when I look at an ash, we're not planting them here in the city as part of any city plantings, because we know that they're going to be dramatically impacted by emerald ash borer, which likely could be here already in the city and just not detected yet. So look at that and say, hey, this is an opportunity to take a tree out that you know, is likely going to unfortunately fall victim to emerald ash borer. So it's a good opportunity to replace it with species that won't. Those are just some removal examples, but when I look at some pruning examples and some other restoration examples, it's trying to focus on the ones that are best acclimated for the site. They're going to have the best chance of survival. They're going to have the best chance of reproducing in areas where reproduction is desired, such as some of our managed forest properties and other things here in the city. Trying to select those and devote a lot of effort towards the encouragement and protection and preservation of those, the replacements of those that are not so well suited or really inappropriate for the area.
Can I give one example?
Yeah, also, please go right ahead.
Or just one other example that we recently did is out at Butler Head, where if you've been out at Butler Head, you may have seen a lot of our hemlocks are starting to either die or are severely impacted by hemlock woolly adelgid. We had an opportunity to get some free trees last spring from Central Maine Power, is that who gave to us? And they, unfortunately, they're spruce, which wouldn't have been sort of the tree we would have chosen there, because spruce also may have impacts with climate long term, but for now they're perfect to put in there. So we were able to underplant in the areas of the hemlock stand that are being degraded, to try to get another cohort of trees coming up in an area where we know we're going to lose the forest canopy. So those are that's an example of other things we're looking to do as part of the forestry committee.
Yeah, absolutely. Other current action is staying up to date on best practices. So what are the best practices in terms of managing our urban forests for climate change? That really comes in terms of regularly attending workshops, participating in focus groups, attending events like this, outreach activities, learning opportunities, reviewing literature, all the stuff to make sure that we can stay on the cutting edge of what needs to be done. So the focus on the future is eye on the emerging issues. We're not out of the woods by any means, no pun intended on any of this stuff. And we don't know what we don't know in a lot of things. Justin talked about not knowing a lot of what we have to do, a lot about our species composition here in the state. We don't know what we don't know about issues that are going to come up, and staying and positioning ourselves in a fashion to be able to address these things in an effective manner comes with good surveillance and good planning. So eye on the emerging issues and using that as a planning tool and an action tool when necessary. Regional cooperation. See a lot of communities that are neighbors are going to be undergoing a lot of these. There are going to be undergoing these same issues. And, you know, many hands make light work, and to be able to stay on top of any of these things is a task in its own, and it's best in terms of staying up to date on best practices and what we found successes and failures. If we could get some type of regional cooperation, it's the better advocacy at a state or a national level, even increased outreach and integration. So for outreach, more activities that stress to citizens of Bath and the areas about the importance of our forests and what they're doing already, but the threats that they face, and what every citizen can do in the city to step up and assist possible. Integration into other forms, other places within the city government that and in some private or semi-private, public benefit cooperators that we have. So where we can integrate our effort into some ongoing projects. So like I said, sewer replacement projects, public works type things, making sure that street tree plantings are are included in that site planning review. We're doing a lot of these things already, and historically the forestry division has, but making sure to really put an emphasis on getting the teeth of the comb a little finer on that, to bring some of these issues more to the forefront and less of an afterthought in some things. It can be very famous. I can look at every problem as a forestry issue here, just like our fire chief could look at every problem as a fire issue, or police chief as a crime issue, or so on and so forth as we go down the department. So being able to advocate and be heard and hear where those integrations make good sense is one of our best changes or chances for success. And then advocating for funding. I mean, we're coming at a point where our forests are going to be asked to do more and more, and funding remains static on that, both at a state, local, and national level. So we're going to really need to put money behind these issues to implement good work. And we can write for all the grants that we want and everything, but we're going to be competing against a lot of our neighboring communities and neighboring agencies and things of that nature. So that's where, a regional cooperative effort and citizen involvement can have a lot of really positive effects, is to make sure that we have the money. But we also need to remember, in terms of increasing funding, a lot of the agencies and departments, both at a state, local, and national level, have been suffering from a lack of funding for a number of years. Right? They've been traditionally underfunded organizations. So if we rush with the funding all at the same time, often these agencies don't, and these entities that are tasked with doing it, don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to judiciously use that increase of funding. So some kind of step intervals to get a more robust infrastructure underneath to be able to continue this work is certainly one of the biggest future goals. So thank you all very much for having me here, and look forward to answering some questions later on.
Thanks so much, Nancy and Jack. So our next speaker will be Becky Kolak, the Executive Director of the Kennebec Estuary Land Trust, talking about his work.
Thanks, Ruth. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Now, can I figure out how to? Oh, I did. Excellent. So jumping off of Jack's excellent lead, some of the impacts that KELT is thinking about throughout our work are the impacts of invasive plants and wildlife, warming temperatures, and the changes in the amount and frequency of precipitation events, rising sea levels, and changing compositions in wildlife and plants, a lot of which Justin very eloquently touched on in his presentation. So what is KELT doing now? Well, we're conserving key areas of the landscape, and the map that I showed on the far end there shows our ecological focus areas across the 9 communities that KELT serves, with Bath circled in red. The data for this map was compiled by folks that are far savvier than I am to create a co-occurrence model, which is just super fancy map and talk, which basically means we took data about rare animals and plants, rare and exemplary natural communities, significant wildlife habitat, large undeveloped blocks, riparian habitats, shellfish harvesting areas, brook trout streams, and marsh migration areas. We sandwiched them all together to see where there was overlap and areas of significant value. These ecological focus areas are part of our conservation plan, which help KELT to strategize what landscapes will most benefit wildlife and our area's ecological richness, but also benefit people. KELT strives to find balance between these characteristics, particularly for the more populated communities like Bath. And you can see in our focus area there that the 2 focus areas in Bath are concentrated in the northern and southern ends of the city. So mitigating invasive species, if you can guess by the shape of the map in the middle there, that is our Sewell Woods Preserve. Each color of dot is a different species of invasive plant. So identifying, tracking, and removing invasive species, along with providing educational opportunities for people to learn about them, are part of KELT's stewardship process for the lands that we protect. KELT manages these undesirable species, trying our best to contain and reduce with the goal to eradicate them if possible. Because these species can change the landscape over time and impact the health and the ability of these natural areas to, 1, support the native species that call these places their home, and 2, to rebound after major disruptive events like storms, floods, or droughts. And then finally, engaging community scientists. Across the 7 community science programs that KELT supports, we train community members of all ages to gather data about different aspects of the estuary to create a record of what is happening now in our natural world. Then over time, we can understand how these conditions are changing, whether it's migratory fish or types of phytoplankton, as illustrated in the photos. You can be any age, a community scientist at any age. So finally, what activities are we thinking about as we're moving forward? So restoring habitat, KELT's restoration program, led by the fabulous Ruth Indrick, focuses on managing projects that support natural systems impacted by development over time to be restored for the benefits of people and wildlife in the region. What we want to ensure that natural systems can carry out their natural functions so that they can change and adapt over time. Recently, this has taken the form of returning natural tidal flow to impacted coastal marshes so they can perform valuable ecosystem services like flood control and carbon capture and storage, in addition to being rich habitat for a plethora of plant and animal species. While we don't have an active project in the city limits at this moment, we are thinking ahead and identifying where future projects may occur and how KELT can best be a supportive community partner. We're thinking about connecting habitat. So a part of KELT's conservation process is to think about how we can expand on existing conserved lands to connect them and create larger undeveloped blocks. So the map in the middle is of KELT's Lily Pond focus area, which is also recognized by the state, as Justin mentioned. You may recognize Lily Pond Community Forest, which is the green block to the north. KELT owns a couple of other properties in this area and is actively working on a project just over the town line in West Bath, which is outlined in red. It resembles a little bit of a puzzle, and we are piecing together conserved lands to ultimately create a larger block of habitat that can better support a variety of plants and wildlife, as well as provide a natural space for people. Additionally, large connected blocks of habitat, like we hope to see here in Lily Pond, better support movement of wildlife as conditions change over time. And then finally, identifying and protecting resilient habitat. So when KELT thinks about resilient landscapes, we think about all the different characteristics a landscape can bring to the table, from differently facing slopes, rocks and soils, wet and dry areas, high and low areas. These microclimates provide a richer landscape that can better support a diversity of plants and animals, especially as conditions change. With data sets showing landscape resiliency, like the map of North Bath by the Nature Conservancy, KELT can incorporate this information into our oh so fancy co-occurrence model for our ecological focus areas to continue to hone and strategize what parcels to focus on for possible conservation. And connectivity, between resilience landscape landscapes play a significant role here. So by puzzle piecing together those larger blocks of undeveloped land, we are supporting an area's overall resiliency.
Thank you so much, Becky. And now I'll pass it on to Rod Melanson. He's the Director of Sustainability and Environment for the city, and then we'll be talking about different types of planning and zoning things that can be used to help support the natural landscape.
The most exciting part of the night, everybody. And I misunderstood the assignment just a little bit, but luckily we have the same concerns. The city has the same concerns about climate. And what we'll be seeing, all of those bullet points that Jack and Becky and Justin provided. So I'm starting right off with where we're at with planning. And it's taking stock of what we have, understanding, luckily right now, and I'm gonna skip around, I suppose, but there are a lot of things underway that are allowing us to get a sense of what we have and where we need to be going. So from a municipal perspective, we have to involve the community to make decisions for the community. So a large part of this planning is community engagement, mandated comprehensive planning, moving towards natural areas planning, something that Bath has yet to do in a strategic manner. The comp plan served as that from 2009. The climate action plan that's in place is looking to be updated as well. Underway is the vulnerability assessment with that. So I put in there kind of planning offices are concerned with development that interacts with conservation as well. So I put up where and how we develop matters, not only the look and feel of development, but where it occurs. And conversely, where we don't develop matters. And identifying those, that's even more important, that bullet that I forgot to put in. And it kind of aligns with just piggybacking on what Becky just was talking about and the data that's out there, the mapping. That kind of paints the picture of the policies that get set by municipalities in terms of land use zoning. One of the things that you want to be monitoring as well, you can see some of the things up on the laser thing here. You know, understanding the land use and the percentage of each type of land use per parcel, basically. And then on that lower map, it shows the development of the past 10 years and where that's occurring. And luckily for Bath, those shades show the growth area and the non-growth area, the rural area of Bath. And trying to manage that growth as a municipality to that growth area. And I think even in Justin's maps that he had shown, you know, the ecological integrity and the difference between the two. So projects underway, the kind of broader than just landscape too. The Climate Action Commission Sustainability Office are working on a lot of things that involve things outside of just land use. I mean, the big projects right now are comprehensive planning, rezoning, and vulnerability assessments. Those are informative to us to provide the path forward on creating a more resilient community. But then there's minor projects that are just putting our house in order, meaning the municipality, even though as Paul saw on the first slide, 5% of the greenhouse gas emissions doesn't mean we should not do anything. So we're advancing some of those projects as well, and they're up on the list here. One of the ones and why we're all here tonight is engagement and hearing from you. So I'll stop talking really soon here. And to end that, just kind of some of the tools and things that we can be thinking about from a municipal perspective in protecting these landscapes for resilient purposes. So creating the plan, that's kind of what I was getting at in the first couple slides. More particularly, and this is, you know, there's a toolbox that I'm not even getting exhaustive here as to what kind of zoning things can be done or other incentives can be done from a municipal perspective, but development could be a trade-off. Everybody who owns a piece of land or property in Bath has a bundle of property rights. So from a municipal perspective, when we make decisions about land use, we have to be sensitive to that and either provide incentives or prohibit certain uses. And so there's a spectrum of tools that are available. One in particular I'll mention, when I was in Thompson, we developed a special area management plan, and it was federally adopted through the EPA and Army Corps of Engineers to allow for a particular resource, vernal pools, to be traded off to protect rural pools. So that was, we knew that where we wanted growth in the growth area, and we know where that is in Bath, although there's probably not many vernal pools in the downtown area. Some towns do have growth areas that look more rural. I mean, that's one of the beauties in Bath is you can drive around and know where the growth in rural areas pretty sharply here. Some places you drive around and you don't know if you're in a growth or a rural area. But by zoning, you can make that trade happen and grow where it's appropriate and protect where it's appropriate. And a lot of the tools up here are just that, mitigation fees for certain uses that come in to offset that and conserve. And one of the things that I like seeing is the alignment of the data and the mapping that already exists about where KELT is looking at conserving and where the city would be wanting to be not growing. So I think I'll end it with that and hand it to you, Ruth, to chat about questions and answers.
Thank you. Great. So the library closes at 7, so we have about 15 minutes for questions. I think we'll start with questions from the audience. And then we'll see if, Hannah, are there any online questions?
No.
Okay, well, great. So does anyone have any questions? Yes.
A group in my church, the neighborhood next to the Catholic Church, read the book, Douglas Tallamy's book about Nature's Best Hope, which was focused on better connectivity of land by persuading residents in the town to use more native species on their properties. And I find myself, as I listen to all the discussion of natural areas that we're trying to preserve, how much of a role that kind of action could play, or is it really pretty minor?
Yeah, can we pass that on to Nancy?
So I think that's a great question because, we're all looking for things that we can do to help out. And I think that anytime you can plant native species, I think you're doing a benefit. One of the things that has been in the news a lot recently is the decline of invertebrate species.
Right.
And some of our native trees support a really broad range of invertebrates that are beneficial. So by doing that planting of native species, I think you're having that approach where that tree will benefit more invertebrates. Because it benefits more invertebrates, it's going to benefit more bird species or pollinators that can benefit our plants. And so I think one of the roles that Jack and I actually have been talking about was whether or not one of the roles that the forestry committee can do is in the future provide that list to citizens of plants that they might want to consider planting to take the place of some of our non-native species. So I think that's a great approach.
Just to piggyback on this man's question and then comment, we had built a house last year, and so we have a piece of land that we have determined will not have one blade of grass. It will have all pollinators, all natural species, totally, half an acre. It's not a lot, but it's something.
Thank you. Jack, did you?
I was just gonna comment that, anything that's gonna help native pollinators survive and increase those numbers because they're a group of species that are declining too rapidly. So I think anything that's going to benefit pollinators would be really good as well.
Are there, so, I mean,
Just jump to real quick on that. So when I was in forestry school, I had the privilege of working on a bird study that Doug Gallagher was actually one of the advisors on. It was remote, it was at the University of Delaware and I was at the University of New Hampshire. And I did vegetative analysis for what these birds were going to be eating. So I focused primarily on the vegetation as a forester, but I helped with insect collection and what was going on. What we found from a lot of our non-native invasive species in New Hampshire and southern New Hampshire at the time was glossy buckthorn and some of the other ones that were some of our primary offenders, Asiatic bittersweet, some other ones. It simply didn't provide enough really nutritious insects that started supporting bird populations. The insects that we sampled off, say Norway maple, Asiatic bittersweet, glossy buckthorn were our highly chitinous insects. So they have a really hard exterior, ants, and they were transient. They just simply happened to be on that plant, passing over it to get to a much better plant. And so birds would waste a tremendous amount of resources to be able to try to extract these insects, but they weren't getting a lot of nutrients back out of. So on any scheme, you know, from your half acre, where that's the average size of some of the smaller songbird species, that's their entire habitat, you know, their entire breeding habitat. These little things start to add up to big things.
And
So
it actually goes beyond the insects. It goes also to the fruits that these plants are bearing,
Yep.
that non-native plants are bearing. So there was a study that looked at nesting cardinals that
Yep.
nested in barberry.
awful.
And what they found was the cardinals were eating the berries off the barberry plants, but there wasn't enough nutrition in those plants to actually allow them to fledge their fledglings. And so it was a sink for
Yeah.
what we call a wildlife sink for birds like cardinals.
They actually laid eggs that were not viable to the point that when the researchers went to sample them, they could put their fingers through the egg because the shells were so weak. So that's what that's some of the really, not only do I feel like a lot of these non-native invasive species are incredibly unsightly and certainly outcompete some of our more natural, plants, but they almost have an exponential effect on the degradation of the environment around them.
for folks in the audience, I know, so Jack and Nancy, you mentioned maybe having the forestry committee put together some type of a list. Is that a resource you'd be excited about? I'm seeing a head nodding, lots of head nodding, that's exciting. Is there any other types of resources that would be useful for you? Yeah, Karen.
A nursery that might provide some of the other things, I think particularly of, white oak. I don't see that as a nursery.
One thing that I will mention is, the forestry committee is having our annual meeting next month. And it's the meeting where we, look at our sort of 3-year goals and what we want to do as a committee. And if you have thoughts about what you'd like to see us do as a committee along those lines of resources for people in town, just let us know, and it's something we can put on our agenda to talk about.
I know that, some of the soil and water conservation districts will do like native plant sales, and Maine Audubon does native plant sales, but I don't know if there are any pretty local here, or although maybe we could try to advertise some of the other ones.
Yeah, we do have a nursery, a very pretty small scale nursery, but we can't do it at the scale that provides a lot, but we just did order some new trees for the nursery. And we were really focusing on species that, got 2 species. One is black gum and the other one is, ironwood. But they're both species that are sort of towards the northern limit of their range. And so it's two great species that can be helpful in terms of, climate change. But we don't have the space to do broad scale nursery work. But there are a couple of native plant nurseries in Maine that do focus on providing those native species. Pearson Nursery down in Pittsburgh. think it's Biddeford, yeah, that area, there's a lot of native plants.
If you go to the Wild Seed Project, they have a list of native plant nurseries, and they're another really great resource. Last spring, they did a wonderful virtual lecture for KELT. So if you're interested, you can go to our website, kennebeckestry.org, to our virtual learning library, and you can watch it there.
And if you sign up on the sign up sheet outside, I'll try and remember to email around some of these resources that folks are sharing.
The last thing that I can think of too is that, there is a list available of those, tree species that would be beneficial to plant in this area that are likely to still, maintain themselves on the landscape in the face of rising temperatures and drought and stuff like that. So, I could maybe get, you guys don't have that list, I can get it.
That would be great.
Maybe I'll put on the forestry committee website if I ever get around to updating it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if Justin could speak a little bit more about peat. I know that, the nurseries like Still and Love has bags and bags of peat moss. Is that what we're talking about? And should we be avoiding that and garden and steer away from selling that? Given that peat's, nice, high, able to store garden.
So the question was about where does the peat come from that's sold in garden centers? So that is coming from, it is mined from peatlands primarily in Canada. And I mean, I don't have specific knowledge about any of the Canadian sites, but in general, it's not a sustainable, or I should say, it's not a renewable resource. What is the level of impact? I mean, you can get a lot of peat out of a single peatland, so I don't know that like it's making a huge impact on the global carbon situation, but it's not there's a lot of peat in a peatland, and they'll you can continue to mine it for a long time. There's one or two down east in Maine that do serve the gardening industry. So I don't really have a strong opinion on the use of it. I don't personally use it precisely because of those questions, but I don't have more information for you than that.
Okay.
I have another question for Nancy. What would your preferred underplanting be for stands of hemlock that are suffering from the low value?
Yeah, I think if we had gotten white pine, we would have probably been happy with white pine only because of the, how long students going to be able to maintain itself on the landscape. The trees did really well, even with the drought. We put them in and that drought hit, and the spruce did really well. And maybe they're because they're right next to the water, maybe they're going to be fine where they are. But I think probably white pine would have been a better choice for underneath there.
Mhm.
And there are some white pines that are coming on their own. So, and I think that's probably what will end up being the dominant tree there.
And then I had another question for Justin. Does the city ever imagine the hemlock, ash forest ended up within 10 miles, 20 miles? I mean, the rate of advancement over the course of the years isn't that quick. Would you try to create some kind of buffer around the area? Or,
I'm sorry, are you asking Justin or are you asking me?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
So the idea of a fire break, is that a realistic?
No.
I've heard people talk about.
No.
The problem with emerald ash borer is by the time you detect it in the location, it's already out beyond that. So,
And it's in Portland area now. It's been observed there.
Yeah.
Any other
One thing,
questions?
I'll just weigh in on the emerald ash borer here just for a moment. One of the things that you can do is in an early detection phase is reach out to the Maine Forest Service and engage them on their trap tree program. where you essentially, if you have an ash tree on your property, you girdle it and you stress the tree out. And the idea that is, it's going to attract the ash borer that are in the area, the emerald ash borer that are in the area. And you're going to be able to sort of find out before it's become widespread if it is in that area. And so there are certain things that can be done for certain street trees that are really important, if there are some in Bath. So I recommend reaching out to the Maine Forest Service to ask them about the trap tree program if you have an interest in that.
And then the other thing about with Emerald Ash Borer, Maine Forest Service is partnering with University of Maine and the tribes to do workshops on Emerald Ash Borer that are talk about management, seed collecting, and other aspects. So I think that information is probably available on their website now. Because I just got the email today, but it's a series of webinars and workshops that people can attend.
And who's doing that?
It's Maine Forest Service, University of Maine, and the tribes.
I think the first one is coming up in March, if I'm not mistaken.
First week of March. I think. All right, we're probably at the closing time for the library, so I should probably let folks go. But if you have any other questions or any other feedback about this program or ideas for other programs, please feel free to fill out one of the comment sheets on your way out the door. If again, like add your email to the sign up list and I'll try and send out some of the resources that folks have mentioned. And thank you so much to Justin, Jack, Nancy, Rod, and Becky for taking the time to share information with all of us.